Pretending to be asleep saved my life. I am currently 19 years old, but this happened when I was 10, and it still feels like yesterday. It all started on a cold winter Saturday in 2013. In my family, we were always used to going to bed early compared to others. I was embarrassed by this, so I would lie to my friends about what time I went to sleep. For months, after my parents put me to bed, I would stay awake for another hour or two on my phone, chatting with friends on WhatsApp or playing a popular game. Sometimes, my parents would get up to go to the bathroom or to the kitchen for a glass of water, and I would have to quickly turn off my phone and pretend to be asleep. That night, I was playing a mobile game I had been addicted to for a while. Several hours had passed when I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. I didn't remember hearing my parents go downstairs to the kitchen. I assumed that, since I was so focused on the game, I hadn't noticed my dad going down for a glass of water. Do you know that feeling of being able to recognize your family members by their footsteps? Well, these footsteps were a little heavy, though they were trying to be quiet, just like my dad used to do. So, I quickly assumed it was him, turned off my phone, hid it under the covers, and pretended to be asleep. A minute or two later, I noticed the footsteps had stopped. Taking advantage of the darkness, I opened my eyes slightly and saw my father's silhouette approaching my room, just as he always did. After several long seconds, he went back to his bedroom. I thought, great, I can play a little more. I heard him open the bedroom door and go back to sleep. I had a habit of counting to 5 to make sure he wouldn't see the light from my phone from his room, which was just a few steps away, and I did this when I didn't hear the door close. Just as I was about to fall back into my gaming addiction, I heard dull thudding noises coming from my parents' bedroom. That stopped me from turning my phone back on. They were strong, dry thuds. I had no idea what was happening, but I assumed it was adult matters, as my friends had mentioned before. I was curious to see what it was since they talked about it so much during school breaks. I decided to secretly spy. Since their door wasn't locked, I got out of bed, moving as quietly as possible, and crouched near my parents' door, pressing against it in hopes of seeing something I could talk about later. Please, don't judge me. I vividly remember what I saw. The shadow of a large man with what appeared to be a knife, stabbing what looked like 2 slightly firm pillows. I froze, watching and listening to those dry thuds. I instantly knew they weren't pillows. They were my parents. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just took a deep breath. I didn't even have the courage to exhale. I was completely frozen. My brain jolted, or something like that, and I snapped back to reality. I could hear my heart pounding at a speed I had never felt before, not even during PE class. I think my instinct told me, go back to your room now, or you will die. Without thinking, I obeyed. I returned to my room more carefully than when I had left, struggling to breathe, my heart racing uncontrollably. I stared blankly at a single point, thinking about nothing, frozen once again. My brain jolted again when the thudding noises stopped. I felt cold. At that moment, I thought the best option was to keep pretending to be asleep. So I lay down in bed, making almost no noise, and closed my eyes. I could feel my heart pounding rapidly, something I had never experienced before. The beats echoed in my head until I heard the footsteps again. At that moment, I felt my hearing adjust to try to determine the exact location of the intruder. I noticed he was heading toward my room. Even though I had my back to the door, I didn't open my eyes, but I could feel that he was there, standing in the doorway, looking at me. I wanted to cry and scream, but I couldn't. My most primal instincts were controlling my body at that moment. After long seconds of agony, I heard the footsteps going down the stairs. I didn't move, nor did I open my eyes. As I said, I couldn't. I heard sounds from downstairs. Less than a minute later, I heard footsteps coming up the stairs again, this time slower. I didn't understand why. I thought they were coming from the living room based on the sounds I had heard earlier. Then, I quickly realized he was inside my room. Not at the door, but inside. I heard footsteps behind me. I knew he was just a few steps away. I could feel his presence and his breathing, slightly quickened, yet steady. I sensed him leaving my room and going back to my parents' bedroom. Then he turned around, and this time, I felt his breathing even closer, as if he was doing something. After that night, my life was never the same again. I survived, but something inside me had changed forever. The scene I witnessed was burned into my mind, like a scar that time could never erase. By the time the police arrived, it was already morning. I don't remember falling asleep, only lying motionless in bed until the sound of sirens cut through the heavy silence of the night. The noise of doors being broken down and the sharp voices pulled me out of my trance, but I was still in shock. I couldn't cry, I couldn't speak. I just watched everything around me as paramedics moved in and out of the house. Neighbors gathered in the street, and chaos took over. The police led me outside, covering me with a blanket, while one of them tried asking me questions. "Are you okay, kid? What happened? Did you see anyone?" But I couldn't answer. My voice simply wouldn't come out, and I still felt the weight of fear paralyzing every muscle in my body. I was taken to the home of a distant relative, an aunt I barely knew. They said it would be temporary, just until they could arrange proper care for me. At that point, I still hadn't cried. The tears only came days later when they officially told me my parents had been murdered. I already knew, of course, but hearing those words sent a wave of despair through me that I could no longer contain. I cried until there was nothing left in me, but somehow, even that didn't bring relief. The pain was a part of me now, something I would have to carry. The following days were a blur. Interrogations, lawyers, social workers. Everyone seemed to want something from me, but no one really wanted to understand what I was feeling. My dreams were haunted by the shadow of that man, the sound of the knife, the metallic scent in the air. I couldn't sleep for more than a few hours before waking up drenched in sweat, convinced that he was still there, standing in my doorway, watching me. The police promised they were doing everything they could to find the killer, but months passed without any progress. No trace, no solid leads. The only thing I knew was that, somehow, that man knew where everything was in our house. He knew where my parents slept. He knew how to move silently through the house. And he knew exactly when and how to watch me. That was what tormented me the most, the thought that he knew our routine. It didn't seem like a random crime. It felt like something much darker. One night, months after the incident, while I was in my aunt's house, I felt something I hadn't felt since that terrible night. The same chill, the same shiver crawling up my spine. It was as if someone was watching me. The window was slightly open, and I could have sworn I saw a shadow pass through the yard. My heart started pounding again. The same primal fear rushed back in full force. My instincts told me to stay still, just like before, and once again, I obeyed. The next morning, I went to the window, but nothing seemed out of place. Even so, that feeling of being watched never completely left me. I knew, somehow, that he was still out there. The sense that he had returned, that he was watching me, was too strong to ignore. But how could I convince anyone that it was real? Over time, I realized that no one believed me anymore. To them, I was just a traumatized child, trapped in painful memories. But I knew the truth. He wasn't finished. I was next. And he was just waiting. I started investigating on my own. I combed through old news reports, read everything I could about similar cases in the area. I didn't find anything exactly the same, but some clues pointed to a series of violent break-ins from years before, all following the same pattern. Families being attacked in their sleep, almost never leaving survivors. The difference was that in those cases, the killer never let anyone live. That made me wonder, why did he let me live that night? Was it intentional, or did he simply not see me? The thought that he knew I was there but chose not to kill me terrified me even more. As time passed, my obsession with finding him grew. My grades dropped. I isolated myself from my friends. My aunt started worrying about my behavior. I barely ate, barely slept, and spent hours analyzing city maps, trying to find patterns in the old crimes. But nothing made sense. It was as if he had disappeared. Until one night, nearly 4 years after my parents' murder, I received an anonymous message on my phone. There was no number, just a short text that read, "Have you been sleeping well lately?" My blood ran cold. It was him. It had to be him. Panic took hold of me, but with the fear came a certainty. He was watching me again, and this time, He wouldn't stop until he finished what he started. In that moment, I knew I could no longer wait. I couldn't keep pretending I was safe. He was playing a game, and I was the final piece. The only thing I could do was face this terror, somehow, before he came for me. The next few days were a quiet preparation. I needed to be ready. I needed to find him before he found me. And deep down, I knew. The next time I heard those footsteps, it would be the last. The night I received that anonymous message was when everything started to unravel. Or at least, that's what I thought. I couldn't sleep. Every sound in the house made me jump. My eyes burned from staying awake, but the fear of closing my eyes and being caught off guard kept me awake. I knew he was out there, waiting for the right moment. I just didn't know when. Then, on a dark and silent night, it happened. I was lying in bed, my heart pounding, trying to listen for any sound that would indicate his arrival. That's when I heard something. Footsteps. This time, it wasn't my imagination. They were real. They were coming toward my room, exactly like the night my parents were murdered. The dry, rhythmic sound of boots hitting the wooden floor. I held my breath, sweat trickling down my forehead, and my body froze again, just like the first time. The door creaked open slowly, the sound of wood filling the silence. I didn't want to open my eyes, but a stronger force made me face it. There he was, the man from the shadows, the one I knew would return. But this time, there was no escape. He stood there, frozen at the door, watching me the same way he had on the night my parents died. His eyes were two pits of darkness. Before I could react, he moved. A quick blur, a shadow lunging toward me. I couldn't fight back. I couldn't scream. It all happened in an instant. I felt a heavy blow to my chest, and then everything went dark. The world around me disappeared. My body gave way, my consciousness collapsed, and I lost consciousness. When I opened my eyes, the bright glare of white lights blinded me for a moment. I blinked several times, trying to adjust my sight, but everything seemed blurry. There was a ringing in my ears, and I could barely understand where I was. Slowly, my vision cleared. I was in a white room. The sterilized smell of a hospital filled my nose. There were machines around me, and I was connected to tubes. I tried to move, but my body was heavy, sluggish. "He's awake," a female voice shouted. The voice sounded familiar but seemed so distant, as if it were coming from another world. I looked to the side and saw a figure approaching the bed. My heart stopped for a second. It was my mother. She was there beside me, tears in her eyes. My father appeared right behind her, his face full of emotion. I blinked, confused. This didn't make sense. They were dead. I had seen it with my own eyes. What? How? I whispered, my voice hoarse and weak. My mind was spinning, trying to process what was happening. My mother held my hand firmly, as if she wanted to anchor me back to reality. "Calm down, my son. You're safe now." "We're here," she said in a sweet voice, but I was still dazed. How could they be here? "But you, I saw." I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out coherently. Then the doctor entered the room and approached the bed, checking the equipment around me. He looked at me with a calm smile, but his expression was serious. "You've been in a coma, son, for a long time," he said in a deep, compassionate voice. "Calm down." "How long?" "7 years," the doctor replied calmly. "You had a very serious car accident when you were 10. You hit your head hard and went into a deep coma. It's a miracle you woke up." My heart raced. 7 years. An accident. None of this made sense. I remembered everything so clearly. The sleepless nights, the murder of my parents, the man from the shadows. How could all of that have been just a dream? My mother wiped away a tear and hugged me carefully. "My son, you've been through so much. We're so happy to have you back with us," she whispered. My parents were alive. That feeling of terror I had carried for years. Was it just a dream? Or worse, a post-death experience? "No," I stammered. I saw you die." The doctor approached and placed his hand on my shoulder. What you experienced during the coma could have been a very vivid projection from your mind. It's not common for coma patients to have extremely lucid dreams, but none of this was real. It was your mind trying to process the trauma and the pain. I wanted to believe him, but the intensity of my feelings, the reality I had lived for so long, was so solid. As I tried to process what the doctor was saying, flashes of those terrifying nights came to the surface. The man from the shadows, the feeling of being watched, the footsteps on the stairs. All so real, so tangible. But now, none of that mattered. I was alive. My parents were alive. And that endless nightmare was just that. A nightmare. Still, the question that stayed etched in my mind was, had it really been a dream or some sort of post-death experience? Something beyond what any of us can comprehend. I didn't know the answer. Maybe I'd never know. What remained now was trying to return to life. A life I had left behind 7 years ago. But one thing was certain, even if none of that was real, the fear, the pain, and the terror from that experience would stay with me forever, like shadows in the back of my mind.